Question for lawyers. When did holy shit flash through your mind in court? Not in the sense of holy shit, everything is going terribly, but more like holy shit, I can't believe she just said that. First jury trial, a fairly serious charge. I'm cross-examining the complainant. Answering my question, she says, "Well, come on, I lie all the time." Do I really need to say that I won the case? When I was 16, I rear-ended a guy's car at a red light. Very minor damage. The car was almost completely stopped. Over the next 5 years, that guy sued me, accusing me of causing all kinds of injuries. When the case finally went to a hearing, it somehow came out that the guy regularly walked 5 kilometers. While testifying, my lawyer asked whether he could really walk 5 kilometers. "I can walk 15, he bragged to the jury. The jury didn't award him a single cent, and he had to pay all court costs. A story from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court. I don't remember what the charge was. The main prosecution witness was asked whether she could identify the defendant. She looked around the courtroom and seemed confused. My friend was already celebrating the win in his head because if she couldn't identify the perpetrator properly, the charges would likely be dropped. I'm mentally filing the case in the wins folder. Then he glanced at his client, who promptly raised his hand with enthusiasm, making it very easy to identify him. Even the judge couldn't resist a facepalm. Never ask a question you don't want the answer to. The prosecutor suggested that my client had used stolen canned goods to trade for drugs. Thinking this was a ridiculous idea, I asked my client whether he had ever traded food for drugs. He replied that once he traded a frozen chicken for heroin. Needless to say, I did not choose this case. I was sitting in the audience at a bail hearing for a man accused of a disgusting crime against a very young relative of his. The judge began listing the bail conditions, including surrendering his passport. The man turned to his lawyer and loudly said something like, "So that means I'll still be able to fly back home, right?" The judge stopped and revoked bail. An acquaintance of mine, a lawyer, was in court on a workplace injury case. The judge asked his client, "What exactly is your injury?" She replied, "I can't raise my arm higher than this," and demonstrated by lifting that very arm to show how high she supposedly couldn't raise it. I was an idiot, who almost completely screwed himself over. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I pleaded guilty to the first case, which almost always comes with probation, but in my case, I managed to avoid that condition. When it was time to plead guilty to the second case, the prosecutor didn't ask for probation because she thought I'd already been given probation on the first charge. That's exactly what she told the judge. I was such a moron that I almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed me by the shoulder and hissed, "Shut up!" She doesn't know. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. I was representing a man charged with 3rd-degree assault and DUI. In my state, 3rd-degree assault means you assaulted a social worker or a police officer, and it's a felony. The charges were that he swore at the cops and punched one of them in the face. We're sitting at the defense table. The officer is testifying about all the statements my guy allegedly made, including some pretty nasty profanity. Out of nowhere, my client yells, "Hey, asshole, get the hell out of here."
"You son of a bitch!"
We lost that case. Another time, the judge asked my client whether anyone had forced him to plead guilty, and he answered, "Yes." My attorney and I almost shit ourselves. Then the guy laughed and said, "Just kidding. No, nobody. I was clerking in court back when I was in law school. I'm a lawyer now. There was a fight in a club. Someone broke someone else's jaw. The accused had 6 friends insisting it couldn't have been him because he never had a beard, while the victim said the attacker had a beard. His friends used a very specific phrasing, something like, "My friend has no facial hair, and since he works professionally in the food industry, that would violate existing regulations." After 3 witnesses repeated that exact phrasing word for word, the judge stopped one of them and asked if he even knew the meaning of a couple of terms in that sentence. The witness couldn't explain them. Defense counsel was sanctioned for coaching witnesses, and the defendant was denied a plea deal that would have replaced prison time with a fine and community service. I was in court when a defendant said, "Yeah, I stabbed her with a knife, but I didn't mean to." It reminded me of a post where a man said, "And she ran into my knife." A knife wound is called a knife wound. He ran into my knife. He ran into my knife 10 times. Not in court. But I once defended a juvenile in a robbery case with very little evidence. It was supposed to be two guys, but they only caught this kid. He didn't have any stolen property, he was arrested in his own home, and he was wearing different clothes than the person described by the victim. He was an honor student, his family was kind and supportive. He wrote poetry, played musical instruments. I was convinced this was a case of mistaken identity. I met with one of his teachers to get a character reference, and the teacher perfectly matched the description of the second robber. So yeah, the quiet honor student was also a thief. I was in court drafting paperwork for defense counsel on a plea agreement that included release to go home when a person is released from custody and doesn't have to serve prison time. We heard a noise to our left and saw the defendant himself, sitting in the courtroom inside the biggest cloud of vape smoke I've ever seen. Then he worked up the nerve to tell the judge that his vape had exploded in his hand. He did not get released. He's still sitting. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a journalist who writes about court cases. So stories like this are endless. One guy was charged with attempting to murder multiple police officers. At sentencing, the prosecutor stated that while awaiting the verdict, the defendant had gotten a prison tattoo of a gravestone with the names of all the cops he had tried to kill, but the defendant still had the nerve to beg for a lighter sentence. He got several hundred years. I was clerking in law school, working on domestic violence cases. The district attorney asked me to speak for the first time during an arraignment of a man accused of beating his wife. An arraignment is when the defendant hears the charges and then pleads guilty or not guilty. When the judge called on me, I got seriously nervous and told the defendant that his crime was punishable by up to 30 years in prison, when in reality it was 30 days. He went pale. His family and friends were in the courtroom, jaws on the floor. The judge stopped me and said, "I think you meant 30 days, counselor." Everyone, and including the defendant, burst out laughing. I represented, pro bono, a client who had just turned 18. He was charged with serious property damage. I walk into the courtroom for the bail hearing, and the judge turns to him and says, "I knew you'd be back here once you turned 18. Then the judge turns to me and says, "Counsel, you might want to hear your client's history. No bail. I'm not a lawyer, but I once gave testimony about my dog in a civil dispute between neighbors and my parents. The opposing attorney was questioning me. I hadn't even finished elementary school yet. He asked whether our dog was aggressive. She was a gentle Rottweiler, always protective of me and my brothers and sisters. His last question, one I'll never forget, was, 'Did your father tell you what to say in court today?' I answered, 'Yes.' Then he asked, 'And what did he tell you to say?' I said, 'The truth.' I was too young to remember the courtroom's reaction. But according to my father, the judge burst out laughing, and the opposing attorney felt the ground drop out from under him. Unfortunately, I can't go into details, but my client said he was growing weed for medical purposes, making air quotes with his fingers, and then whispered, "Subscribe to the channel and share this video so you don't miss new interesting discussions, memes, and funny stuff."